Okay, if I get your attention, please. All right, thank you all for coming tonight. We are starting a brand new series, and we have a guest speaker that's going to be up here for the next 3 weeks. Okay? So what we want to do is we want to talk a little bit about creation. And John here, John Dwiggins, is our guest speaker, and in just a moment here he's going to come on up and talk to us a little bit. And, you know, we went through the Genesis series this last year at church, and Pastor Danny did a great job of kind of going through some of the beginning parts of Genesis. Well, John here has a very biblical view of that very same thing, but he wants to go into a little bit more detail for you guys about some of the things that he believes to be true through some of his experiences, which I'll let him share about a little bit. So I'm going to give it up for him. You guys give it up for him. He's going to be with us the next 3 weeks, okay? All right,
How's that?
Keep going.
Go ahead and...
Keep talking.
Is it on now?
Yep, you're on.
All right. Cool. All right. Well, I hope we're going to have some fun in the next 3 weeks. You guys like to have fun?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. All right. Let's see. Get this set up for me here.
Wherever you want.
Perfect. Excellent. All right. Well, I'm an engineer. I'm a scientist. I'm an also avid student of history and biology, but I also love students. I used to work 5 years with college students, so I'm very excited to be here with all of you and get a chance to talk with you about this subject. So first of all, those were some 3 questions at the start. How did people in the universe get here, and how long did it take? How old is the Earth, and how do you know? And why are we taught evolution in school? So what are some of the answers you guys came up with? Don't be shy. Yes?
For the first one, the world came about by God. God created it. And it took 6 or 7 days, depending on how you do it.
Okay. Any other thoughts? How old is the Earth? Any other? Yes?
You can also interpret the days as years or time periods, but most people believe that it's actual days, like.
Okay. Okay. Yes?
The world is approximately 6,000 years old.
Okay. We got
According to genealogies.
an answer of 6,000. Okay. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
We're taught evolution in school because if you taught creationism, which is like the major alternative, you would have to acknowledge God.
Okay. Taught evolution, so we don't acknowledge God, huh? Any other thoughts? Yes.
Also, like, not acknowledging God, but not acknowledging that there's a higher power other than yourself. Like, it's you rule your own world.
No higher power. Rule your own world. Let me ask you this question. Of what practical importance is it to any of you what happened 30 million years ago? Any of you come up with a good reason? Yes?
If I'm an evolution, is perhaps the creation of the world.
Okay.
It's kind of important thing.
All right. Yes?
Something was created or happened to happen so that along the line I was turned about.
Mm-hmm. Yes? Yes?
For the years question, you could say 6,000 is not accurate, but we really don't know. The genealogies, they could have just said predominant family members or less.
Okay. Yes?
Not to mention if, along the same lines, if even if the genealogies were exactly one after another and were completely accounting for everybody who came along, God could have had the world empty with just animals in it for some time before he put the humans on it, going along with the time periods instead of exact days.
Okay, I'm glad that you guys are thinking and alert, and I hope to make this an interactive and fun session, and as we're going along, as you ask questions, I hope to be able to answer those, and so feel free to ask, and if I'm going to cover it in detail in one of my later ones, I'll pigeonhole that, but I'll be sure to capture it, but I want this to be an interactive session so you guys can have fun and really learn what's going on here. I call this the other half of the story. And why do I call it the other half of the story? Well, you'll find out. There's a proverb here which says, the first to plead his case seems right until another comes and examines him. So many people have only heard one side of the story and never had it examined. So I hope today to present the second half of the story to you guys, and no matter where you're at in your understanding of how we got here, I'm not going to try to convince you of anything. I want you guys to decide. I want to present the other half, and then you think about, hey, does that make sense or not? And for some of you may have already heard some of the other half of the story. That's good. Hopefully this presentation will help you understand better how to present in a clear and simple way to those who haven't heard the second half of the story. So let's get started. Okay. Don't believe everything you've been told, even in school. Oh, am I being radical here? Right. How many of you guys have heard in school that during Columbus Day, part of the problem with the sailors is that if they sail too far, they go off the edge of the earth? How many of you guys have heard that? Yeah? Ooh, yikes. I was taught this in school too, in fact in Lutheran school. And I thought it was really cool, those ships sailing off the edge, imagine that. That'd be pretty scary, wouldn't it? Guess what, folks? The whole story was a myth propagated by Washington Irving in 1828. Most sailors did not believe this. In fact, very few people believed the earth was flat in those days. Interesting, huh? Okay. How many of you have heard that the human embryo passes through all the animal stages as it grows and matures? Have you guys heard that? Yeah. Some of you have. Okay. I was taught that when I was in school. And I thought, wow, that's really cool, like once I looked like a lizard, then maybe a frog and bird, and kind of worked my way up. And look, at the tail stage of development, all these embryos look amazingly alike, don't they? I mean, if you think about it, the fish and the human one's not that much different, right? Well, guess what? Oops, went too far. Guess what happened? I found this out 10 years ago, is that the guy faked the pictures. Look at that. Do any of these pictures of actual embryos look like the things above them? Not hardly. Pretty different though, isn't it?
The rabbit, man. That's kind of close.
So basically what happened is that, can you guys see this past, can you see the bottom line?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, this guy faked his pictures to prove the point of evolution. And what's scary is that this was done in 1874, and months after he put his pictures out, they were debunked by the other scientists that were around in his day, but they kept the story going, even though it's already been proved false for the next, 140 years? You guys still heard of it? Isn't that amazing? It's kind of sad though, isn't it? And then, to make matters worse, there was a guy that tried to save Ernst Haeckel by actually taking the photographs and doctoring them to make them look like more like his original thing. See, they cut off the sac and straighten out this embryo, and oops, let's take off the human's blood sac just to make it look more real. Pretty scary, huh? Interesting. So, what else? But what about all those pictures proving that the evolution of man, right? How many of you have seen this cool picture? Raise your hand. How many of you guys have seen this? Yeah, you all have, right? Well, I did too when I was a kid, and I thought, wow, that's really cool. You know, that really proves evolution, right? I mean, men came from monkeys, right? Well, what about the other half of the story? Guess what? This progression was known to be a fake even when the book was being published in the 1970s. But it has still been used by many years, and all you guys have seen that as proof of evolution. So what the authors admitted that after they wrote the book, they noted there was only fragmentary fossil evidence that existed for human evolution, and that the progression was drawn largely from manufactured or distorted evidence. In the author's words, many of the figures shown here have been built up from a few fragments, a jaw, some teeth, perhaps, and thus are the product of educated guessing. So the whole thing was a fraud. Yet, you guys have all seen it, right? Very interesting. Okay. So, how many of you have been taught? Oh, one other thing about that. This thing is very racist. Do you notice that all of the less primitive people look more Negroid, and the more advanced people look like Caucasian? Racism, right? And you want to know why there's a lot of racism in the world? Because of stuff like that. Exactly. Okay. Yeah, this is not it. But what about moth evolution? How many of you have heard the story of the moths getting on the trees and during the Industrial Revolution? Yeah, you guys have heard that? And the trees, the air pollution came, right? And the trunk of the trees got darker. Therefore, more dark moths survived and the white ones died out, right? I heard that when I was a kid. I read it, I thought, wow, that's really cool. And the white moth population went down, the dark moth population went up, and boy, that really proves evolution, right? Well, what's the other half of the story here? The entire story was a hoax. First of all, the moths don't come out and fly during the day to where they can sit on the tree and it's dark or light. And second of all, they actually had to take dead moths and glue them to the trees to do this. Yeah. Yes, indeed, it happened. So my purpose in sharing these things with you is to help you understand that there has been a lot of things taught to you that were thoroughly false and known to be false, and the purpose was to deceive you into believing something that maybe wasn't true. Okay, but you know what? Don't be surprised. Those of you who are Christians should know what the Bible predicts. And what does the Bible predict? The Bible predicts that the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. So God makes it very plain and evident to everybody that we are created and designed beings, and yet certain people cannot handle the fact that we were created. And so they want to suppress the truth and even tell lies. So what I'm going to do in the next few weeks is share with you guys the other half of the story. And I'm going to try as clearly as I can to present the first part so you understand that, because everyone needs to know both sides before they make their decision. And then I want to present the second half of the story, which I believe to be true. And you know what? I'm an engineer and a scientist, and I've gotten a lot of patents. And you know how I got those patents? By challenging what everybody said was true initially. When I grew up, I was taught evolution in school. It must be true. My dad told me it was so. I believe the Bible, but I thought, you can fit the two together. Well, in the last 10 years, I found maybe that's not the case. Maybe there is a better way. So, we're going to start with 3 key areas, and we're going to follow up on that in succeeding weeks and look at the evidence that is out there, so that you can decide which story makes more sense to you. Which side do you want to fall on? And trust me, you will get challenged with this, and those of you that go off to college will get challenged very severely with the first half. So first of all, there's lots of rocks there, right? How many miles deep are they? I don't even know. And how many thousands of layers of rocks? So everybody knows there's lots of rocks and there's millions of years, right? Well, how did it get to be so in terms of the formation of the rocks? Well, starting in 1830, Charles Lyell, a lawyer and an amateur archaeologist, wanted to discredit the Bible. So he started with the assumption that the way things are now are the way they always were. So the layers were formed very slow and steady like they are now. So it must have taken a very long time, millions of years. I mean, if it takes 1,000 years to make a centimeter, it's going to take millions of years to get up to, half a mile or a mile thick. And it was a very peaceful process. So that's what Charles Lyell put forward in his Principles of Geology in 1830. So, millions of years leads to what? A fellow named Charles Darwin at age 22 read through Lyell's Principles of Geology on his famous voyage aboard the Beagle. How many of you heard of that story? Who's heard of the story of Darwin on the voyage of the Beagle? Yep. Sailed almost halfway around the world. And on that trip, he observed minor changes in animal properties, such as bird beak sizes. And he used those observations plus natural selection, plus Lyell's millions of years, to speculate that life could slowly change from one distinct kind of form to another. See how the two tie together? Therefore, God is not needed anymore. Here's the other half of the story that I'd like you guys to consider. The layers formed very quickly. It took about 1 year during a global flood. And thirdly, it was catastrophic, very disruptive, and destructive. Okay, so, but what about all those fossils in the ground? Yeah, how did they get there? I mean, that proves evolution, right? There's all the dinosaurs there, and, the old ones are the small ones are at the bottom, and the big ones are at the top, and so on and so forth. Well, this is half of the story you've heard first, is that they were very slow and steady in their formation, and it was peaceful. So that's how the fossils got in the ground. That's how they were formed. But what about the other half? How else might they have formed? Rapid burial at the flood, and in a violent manner. So that's the other half of the story as to how it could have happened. Okay, but how could all the mountains have been covered by a flood? How is that possible? Because if all the earth were flattened, the water would be about 2 miles deep. That's about 10,000 feet. Well, Mount Everest is really tall. It's like, 27,000 feet or 29,000 feet? How could that have happened? Well, what's the other half of the story? It says in Genesis that the fountains of the deep opened up to flood the earth. And you know what scientists have found recently? They pinged the earth and used the waves from earthquakes and the seismic things that are going on in the earth. And guess what? They found inside the earth water reservoirs equal to 3 times the volume of the oceans in the earth. So when it says the fountains of the deep opened up to flood the earth, there's plenty of water to do it. And secondly, near the end of the flood, the weight of the water, where the oceans had opened up, where the deep had opened up, it was fractured in the bottom. You've heard about the trenches in the oceans? It was weakened, and all the water came and squashed down the basins of the ocean, and then there was lots of geological activity and pushed the mountains up. And what's interesting, there's fossils on top of Mount Everest. Now, how in the world did they get up there? Well, guess what? Mount Everest was low when the fossils were laid down, and then it was pushed up to the top. So that's the other half of the story about how the fossils could have gotten there and the size of the mountains and how the flood happened. Let's get another interesting fact. I don't know how many of you knew this, but many cultures worldwide that were divorced from Christianity, have nothing to do with Jews or the Bible or anything, had flood narratives very similar to what's in the Bible. For example, a lot of people don't know that the Aborigines, who have only an oral tradition, have passed down a story of a flood that is very similar to what we have in the Bible. So, here's the other half of the story, getting to the Bible. Jesus himself attested to the worldwide flood and its suddenness. And he used that when he was talking about the suddenness of his return to the earth. Matthew 24:37 through 39 says, and he was speaking of the people that were in Noah's day, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Now, some Christians nowadays would have you think the flood was just a little local flood and everything. Well, if that's true, then Jesus' return is only going to be a local return. And here's something else I don't know if you knew, but is the Bible powerful and literally true? This is the other half of the story. You see, back in the New Testament times, I mentioned about all those cultures around the world believed that there was a worldwide flood. And so in Jesus' time, most of the people believed that there was a worldwide flood, whether they were Jews or not. And so at a time when almost everyone believed in the worldwide flood, an amazing prophecy was made about what would start happening around 1830 when Charles Lyell wrote his book. And let me read to you this prophecy. Above all, you must understand, in the last days, scoffers will come, scoffing and following their own evil desires. Does that sound like some of the evolutionists you've heard? Scoffing? They will say, where is this coming he promised? Speaking of God. Ever since our ancestors died, everything goes on as it has since the beginning of creation. But they deliberately forget that long ago, by God's word, the heavens came into being, and the earth was formed out of water and by water. By these waters also the world of that time was deluged and destroyed. This is an exact prediction of what Charles Lyell came about 1800 years later to say, hey, everything is the way it was ever since the start of the world. Everything happened slowly. There was no flood. God predicted it beforehand. Okay, So I want to summarize today by saying we are just starting. In the final 2 sessions, I'm going to present some very interesting evidence that we'll lay out against both sides so that you can decide for yourself which side do you think makes more sense. And I've got some final questions I'd like you to start thinking about this evening. Should I start to reconsider what I believe about the history of the world now that I've heard the other half of the story? Should I fully trust the Bible as God's word, considering the amazing prophecies it's made? And finally, am I ready to meet Jesus when he unexpectedly returns? Because we're now in the last days, as that prophecy stated, because those scoffers have come. So think about it. Think about it. Am I ready? Finally, I've really enjoyed sharing with you all, and you've all been very attentive, and I thank you for that. And just wanted to say that I've got a ton of materials over here on the subject. I've got videos, I've got books, I've got magazines. So if you would like to check those out, feel free to do that. My beautiful wife over there, Laurel, will be happy to help you with that. And also, I'm available afterwards to answer questions and talk more with you guys, those of you that are interested. And also, as an extra freebie, I wrote a science fiction novel. Those of you guys like science fiction? And I have free copies back there of the reviewer copies over there. So if you like a good science fiction read, you're more than welcome to get one of those. Okay.